Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. My name is Dr. Stacy Pearson Wharton, and I am a member of the AKA Foundation of Central Pennsylvania. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you our speaker for this morning, Janet Passley-Clarke, an experienced leader and healthcare executive and clinician, has immersed herself in the specialty of behavioral health for the length of her career as a nurse. Born in Jamaica, West Indies, and migrating to the United States as a child, Dr. Passley-Clarke values the concepts of inclusivity, inclusion, and diversity within the healthcare environment. She currently holds the title of Manager Advanced Practice Clinicians - Psychiatry at Penn State Milton Hershey's Medical Center. Along with her managerial and clinical duties, she's actively involved in educational ventures within and outside of the organization, and is currently serving on the advisory board and facilitator and mentor for Visant transitions to practice. Dr. Passley-Clarke obtained her AA degree from the Community College of Baltimore City, her BSN from Coppin State University, her MS from University of Maryland, Baltimore, and her doctorate of nurse practitioner from York College of Pennsylvania. She's currently matriculating, because all of that education was not enough. She's currently matriculating at the Indiana University of Pennsylvania to obtain her PhD in nursing education.
That's done.
Yes. Yes. Woo-hoo. That's right, doctor. She is board certified advanced practitioner in the specialty of psychiatry by the American Nurses Credentialing Center, and is an active member of the American Nurses Association, the American Psychiatric Nurses Association, the Maryland Nurses Association, and the Pennsylvania Nurses Association. Let's give a hand to our distinguished speaker today, Dr. Passley-Clarke.
And we can go to the question and answer all one. Okay. So everyone can hear me? All right. So thank you all for coming. I appreciate you all being here. I'm a little jet lagged coming off of a trip, but I'm going to do the best possible job that I could do this morning. Okay, so it was interesting. The last speaker, Dr. Jackson, spoke about breast cancer. And a lot of times what we tend to do is to look at someone else and not ourselves, and it happens to other people, but it doesn't happen to us. And we don't put a face on it as Black women because we're scared to put a face on it as Black women. I will let you know that I have had breast cancer 3 times. Okay? I am still in treatment. You don't know, but you wouldn't know that. What I'm saying is it's important, very, very important, to take care of ourselves and do a lot of self-care. A lot of that self-care is mental health care. This is how it ties in. So I was thinking to myself as I was sitting out there, sometimes we just need a face to what it looks like. It does not look like we are at home in the bed and not able to care for ourselves, our family, and do our jobs. What it looks like is that we are functional and that we are working in the community and we're doing everything we're supposed to be doing as Black women, right? But we also have an illness that sometimes comes back and sometimes goes into remission, and sometimes we don't have the gene. I don't have the gene, but I've had it 3 times, okay? I can also say to you that I have 2 girls and 2 boys. She's 31 now, she is going through the genetic testing. We were talking about that as I was coming up here, and she is just gung-ho to do it. And I said to her, most people wouldn't be gung-ho to do this, but she said, "What, Mom? You're still fighting that fight, so I'm going to go ahead and do it. I want to be informed." And I said to her, "Wow, I don't know if I would be as proactive as you're being." And I also have a 22-year-old. She's not at that point yet, but at some point she is going to be there. And I have shared my results with the eldest girl. So what I'm saying to you is not just that it's out there and it's someone else and it may be a deceased family member. It's us. And what does it look like? This is what it looks like, okay? We're strong. So that's the caveat. So segueing into mental health, the power of communication and the power of language is so important. And a lot of times we don't talk about things that are happening to us. We keep them hidden because there's shame, frustration, societal issues that we don't want to deal with. Did you know that about 21% of Americans, that's about 52 million, experience mental illness as of 2020? I'm sure there's more now. There's not, just not the statistics. About 55% of adults with mental illness, that's about 28 million, reported receiving no mental health care assistance at all. 60% of youth are saying they have depression and they're not getting any help. 11% of Americans are uninsured who have mental health illness, and about 193 million people are diagnosed with serious mental health illness every year. So, believe it or not, today is Black Girl Day Off. Does anybody know what Black Girl Day Off is? Okay. October 10th is World Mental Health Day. October 11th is Black Girl Day Off. It started in 2020, and it encourages Black women to take the time to care for their mental health, their emotional well-being, and just being self-aware. It is really important to address your mental health. Acknowledge that maybe there's an issue. How are you going to deal with that issue? If you don't deal with it, you may have a higher incidence of hypertension, diabetes, heart problems, breast cancer, according to the CDC, okay? But live and in color, it happens. Stress compounded by racial and gender discrimination affects your socioeconomic disparities. So it's really important to know and be aware of health. And it's also a time to celebrate your community. You know, when we talk about empowering ourselves and taking time for ourselves on this day, it could be listening to someone, right? Having some empathy, listening to their point of view, promoting confidence in the person, being honest. You know, someone asks you a question, you really don't answer the question, you kind of skirt around a question, but they're really asking you, what do you think about this? What can I do about this? Speaking positively about someone, to someone. Sometimes we tend to speak very negatively about people, and we assume, well, that person can take it. He or she is used to it. They may be used to it, doesn't mean that they can take it. And really address all the obstacles and things that happen in people's lives, the challenges, because they do. People may not talk about it, but it doesn't mean that they don't have obstacles. And really show that, especially with our young people, show that representation, whether it is in books, whether it is in culture, shows, positive affirmations of themselves. That is really important. And again, listen to what people say. As I said, communication is really, really important. So how can we celebrate ourselves as Black women, right? We can do things at home. Tell me what you do at home to celebrate yourself. Anybody? What do you do at home? You said rest? Rest. You go to the spa. Anybody else? Nobody celebrates themselves? Okay. You read. Get your nails done. Go to the gym. Dance. Pray. Anybody else? There are a lot of things we can do. We can walk in our neighborhoods. We can take a nature hike. We can get our nails done. We can do yoga. We can get a massage, right? Whatever you want to do to celebrate yourself, it's important. We could even do some retail therapy. I do that all the time. Now I'm telling you, I love some retail therapy, right? I'm always out there. My husband's all like, where are you going? To spend my own money, all right? All right. So, we talked about celebrating ourselves, and I'm going to kind of bring that back, because when we have young people in the community, a lot of times they role model what they see and hear from us. A lot of that has to do with, especially in these times, some racial stressors, some racial traumas that are happening. We think that, okay, we live in a multicultural society, and that happened in the olden days. That happened to somebody else. We really don't have to do that, especially, I have 4 children, right, from 19 to 32. Okay. Now, their idea of what it is to live in a multicultural society may be a little bit different from me, because I'm a little bit older, just a tad bit. All right. So I remember when my mother used to say to me, have a good time, but be safe. What was she thinking in her mind? She's like, please come back, right? Please don't get stopped by the police. If you do, act like you have good sense, all right? I'm really talking in the vernacular now. Okay. There is a lot of fear and frustration and trepidation about having our kids in this multicultural society. There really is. And there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that fear, right? But what do we do with it? It's important that we are able to address the racial stress and trauma that we have in our lives. And especially when we're talking about BIPOC people, Black, Indigenous, people of color. How do we deal with racism or discrimination in our everyday lives? It may have a negative impact. That impact may be similar to PTSD, right? And what do we do with that? Do we internalize it, or do we address it in a way that is appropriate, right, for the situation? Because everything needs to be appropriate for the situation, right? Especially when we're going out in public. So when we talk about racial stress and racial trauma, we're really talking about, sometimes there are microaggressions that happen to us. Sometimes there are unintentional comments, and people say, oh, I didn't mean that. Okay? People will say, well, I see you, but I don't see you like that. Like if someone says to me, I don't look at you as a Black person. I'm thinking, well, I'm all Black. There's no way that you can't see that. So that kind of says to me, do you actually see me, right? So when we don't address appropriately things that happen to us, whether it's at home or in the community, that can lead to depression, anxiety, not being present at work. It may impact our salary, our promotion potential, and it ultimately undervalues us. So some of the symptoms that you look at when you're looking at racial trauma could be avoidant behaviors, loss of appetite, difficulty concentrating, low self-esteem, feelings of humiliation, frustration, nightmares, depression, anxiety. These are all things that will accumulate over our lifespan. And sometimes we don't address it because of 3 things, okay? 1, individually, we don't want to say we have anything wrong with us. 2, our family, our community, our society says, don't say that. That's not how we deal with things. Or 3, we don't have the resources in the community to help us. So if all 3 of the trifecta happens, then what do you do, right? Who do you go to? It is important that we find someone or an entity to go to help us. We don't want a situation where we get PTSD, we have chronic stress, we have depression and anxiety, we have cardiovascular issues, we have hypertension, we have sleep disturbances, and all of that ends up causing us to really feel badly about ourselves and also others around us, right? So what I want you to take from this is self-awareness and taking care of yourself is very important. Reaching out is very important. And when I say reaching out, it doesn't have to be in the traditional sense, right? I'm going to the hospital, I'm going to a therapist. This is what I'm going to do for my mental health. I think coming to mental health has to be a process. Not everyone is the first thing they'll think of, I'm going to go get a therapist, or I'm going to go get a psychiatrist, or a nurse practitioner, PA, whatever the person, whatever what you want your mental health care to look like. It may be in a little drips and drabs. You may say, I want to read a self-help book, right? I want to listen to a tape. I want to listen to, what are those things where you can listen to podcast, okay? Everybody's listening to a podcast these days. Whatever it takes for you to get to wherever you want to go is your journey. And it is important that you are on that journey, wherever that journey leads you. People come to me and I do a lot of medication management. And I'll tell people, I do this, but this is not what I believe is the end all be all. What I believe is that you do what's best for you. And what's best for you may not be the traditional way to do things. It doesn't mean that you may not eventually decide that you want to do more of the traditional, right? But it doesn't mean that that's where you start. And so what I would say is when we're looking at mental health, taking care of ourselves, taking care of our families, really remember you have to take care of yourself first. I've been on a plane for a few days now, right? You know how you start off on the plane and they tell you everything about the mask and what you're supposed to do. What do they tell you? Put it on yourself first before you put it on somebody else, right? It's the same thing I'm going to say to you in reference to mental health. Make sure we take care of our families so much as women and women of diversity. We don't sometimes take care of ourselves. And I guess my takeaway is for today, it is really, really important to take care of yourself. And the other thing is if you see someone in your family that is having some issues or friends or relations, make sure that you are able to address it. Look at the signs and symptoms. Sometimes you just have to read up on things, right? If you think that someone is not maximizing what they could do for their mental health, maybe you could look at something in their community, right? You could say, hey, I know of XYZ. Maybe you could go and talk to that person. Everybody needs a starting point. Now remember, your starting point may not be their starting point, and people may take your advice and good intentions and put it in their back pocket. It doesn't mean it's going to stay in their back pocket, because they will remember at some point, Miss Janet gave me XYZ. Maybe I should look that up. So it doesn't have to be on your timeline. It's on their timeline. And I think that's really important. And the other thing is really think about being literate in reference to what you know about mental health. We talk about the ability to read and the ability to understand. We have people who say to us in a very nice way that we are not as good as, right? And that can also undervalue us. Maybe we need to reframe that and say, you know what, I understand that may be how you're thinking, but that's really a stereotypical way of thinking of things. This is who I am. This is what I have to offer. There's nothing wrong with that. You are not the aggressive person of color. You are stating a fact. And you are also getting rid of a stereotypical idea as to what you are, what you have to offer, and where you're going. And that is important. So I would say definitely take care of yourself. Today is Black Girl Day Off. You're doing something for yourself right now. Think about it. You are at an event that has to do with mental health, community involvement, medical involvement. You all are rocking it this morning, okay? So that's the end of my little spiel this morning. So any questions or anything anyone has?
I'm coming to you so we can all hear you. Excuse me.
If someone does want to find a therapist, it can be difficult to do that. What advice do you have for either interviewing or going through the process of finding somebody that you feel comfortable with to engage in that relationship?
What I would say is really think about your lifestyle. Depending on how busy you are, you may be a person that can see a traditional therapist in person during daylight hours, right? You may not be able to do that because you are working and taking care of your family, right? And so you may need someone in the evening. So if you call a traditional clinic, you may get traditional hours. However, let's say you decide that you want to see someone who is in private practice. They may have more of availability for evening and weekend hours. The other thing is, there is a site called Psychology Today where you can put in anything you want in reference to your insurance, if you want the person with a particular religion, a particular age bracket, and they will come up with options in your area. There are many options in the Harrisburg area. It's just to look at it. And a lot of times when people come to me, they're like, well, you would think I would say, oh yeah, Penn State Health, right? But depending on the person and depending on their needs, I may give them that resource. And it doesn't mean that the first person that you see, whether it's virtually or in person, is a good fit for you, right? We are a service organization in reference to mental health. And so you have to have a connection with that person, and the person has to have a connection with you. If you've tried and you've talked to that person and you don't have a connection, it may be time for you to move on to someone else because you can't share what you don't feel comfortable with sharing. And you have to, and that has to really speak to you. Like this morning, when the previous speaker came, what spoke to me was, let me put a face on this, right? So at different points, we have to make sure that, you know, it's great if you go to see an in-person therapist. But if you can't do that and you're losing money, and you're not going to be paying your rent or mortgage because of it, or paying a school fee or something like that, then maybe that's not the right option for you at that time.
May I add something? There's also a great website, if you haven't tried it, Therapy for Black Girls. Mm-hmm. And it's a directory of Black therapists around the country. And so that's also another opportunity for you to try to find somebody that could be helpful to you. Questions? Therapyforblackgirls.com.
This is not an easy topic. All right? I mean, and so, and sometimes it's hard to ask questions because then people think you're asking about yourself.
I have a question.
Go right ahead.
So we all deal with fear and anxiety, right? So what, or depression, that's a normal part of the human experience. What do you think is the thing that throws you over the threshold that you think I may need to seek out help to deal with what I'm dealing with right now?
If it affects the way that you function in your daily life, if you are hearing from your family, your children, your husband, there's something wrong here, you're not behaving in the way that you normally would, it's time to really take a good look at what's going on. As a lot of times we can't self-manage ourselves, right? Because we believe that everything is okay with us. But when your family relations, significant other start saying, hey, there's something wrong. If you're in the bed all day and the house is a wreck, and this has been like this for a week, there's something wrong, right? So sometimes we take those cues ourselves, but sometimes it takes someone else to say something to us. And when our loved ones say things to us, they're not being mean. They're not being judgmental sometimes. Oh, that's person. No, they are looking out for your best interest, but you have to be open enough to understand that and seek some guidance, even if you never tell them that you're doing it, right? The first step is that you have to acknowledge that there's something wrong. As many times as other people can acknowledge it, if you don't acknowledge it yourself, you won't move from where you are.
Other questions? Oh, Sojourn.
Not asking for a friend, asking for me. When do you know whether your sleep issues are as a result of the natural aging process as opposed to an underlying need that needs potentially to be addressed through therapy or other means?
Okay. When I think of sleep, I don't immediately think of mental health issues. When I think of sleep, I think of a medical issue first. So if someone comes to me and they're saying, I'm having a hard time sleeping, I think I may be depressed or too anxious, I will say to them, have you gone to your primary care yet? Have you done all this lab work to kind of figure out what is going on with you? Psychiatry is always the last rule out, right? I mean, that's the last thing you think about. Even that's the first thing you think about. Really, for me, if you came to me, it would be the last thing I was thinking about. And then we would go through that process of you really going to your primary care. It may be that you need some type of other consultation, like a sleep study, right? So if it's a sleep study issue, that has nothing to do with me, right? That doesn't mean that I don't take that into consideration in reference to, let's say, medication I'm going to be addressing, because there are a lot of psychiatric medications that have a sleep effect, but they're not sleep aids, okay? So there's the difference. A lot of times we come and we're like, oh, we're gonna get this and it's gonna help us sleep, or it's gonna make us less anxious. But that's not addressing the real problem, because when you wake back up, you're still gonna have the same issue. So I always say to folks, go to your primary care first. Rule out any medical issues. Then if there are no medical issues involved, and we do testing that we can in reference to the amount of depression and the amount of anxiety that you have, then we can make some medication changes or suggestions that may help you sleep. And the other thing that I do before I prescribe is I have this long sheet that I've made up myself with tips as to how to address sleep before I go to medication, because I'm doing everything before I'm prescribing medication, because a lot of times once you get that medication, you're like, this is the holy grail, I don't have to do anything else, but that's not true. So that's what I would say.
I guess this is more I'm asking for your opinion. Mm-hmm. I personally have noticed since COVID, so many people have had or been diagnosed or have, I guess, realized that they have some type of depression, anxiety, some type of mental illness. Can you explain, like, exactly what did happen there?
We all isolated, all of us. And with that isolation, a lot of times things that were pushed under the rug came to the forefront, because we all had to be with each other 24/7, right? In a very close space, depending on your proximity to the other person. We all started seeing people on Teams or Zoom, or we did not have interaction with people. As humans, we need interaction. We can't live in a box. And when we have a situation that we can't touch each other, we can't feel each other, we're seeing each other on a screen, a lot of hidden things happen to us, and we then get into our heads, and whatever was brewing comes to the forefront. It doesn't mean that we are clinically depressed for the rest of our lives. It means that we have a speed bump, and we have to address the speed bump, because if we don't, that speed bump could become a long hill. So I think the isolation the lack of interaction with other human beings for an extended amount of time did cause a lot of us to have anxieties and depression. And that would be normal. For humans, we have to interact. We need that human interaction. During COVID, we did not have that human interaction.
Thank you. So as consumers, as women of color, we have multiple fires burning simultaneously.
Right.
So you mentioned the category of therapist.
So
You mentioned therapist.
Yes.
But in that category, there are counselors, there are psychologists, there are psychiatrists. Is that a decision that as consumers we should be making? Or do you understand my question? So if we go to a therapist and we realize that that is not in their wheelhouse to address, then they're going to recommend or refer us someplace else. As people who are constantly putting ourselves last, competing priorities, time, investment can be something that challenges us and actually prevents us from seeing this process through. Does it matter? Does it matter when we're looking for, quote, therapist, if we start with a counselor, if we start with a psychologist, a psychiatrist?
I think you start where you're comfortable. That doesn't mean that's where you end. Because let's say you go see a cognitive behavioral therapist, and through that process that person's seeing you, if you have a good therapist, that person will then say, I don't think I'm the right person for you. If they have been in practice for, I would say, some time, they will be able to refer you to an individual that they believe would suit your needs better. Are you going to be able to flesh all that out on your own? In all likelihood, no, right? But if you are, I always say to people, if you're with a therapist and you all are girlfriend, boyfriend, but you're not getting anything done, I don't care how great the relationship is, it's probably time for you to move on, because that's not what the relationship is supposed to be, right? And so your therapist, whoever you decide to go to in the beginning, may not be the therapist that you stay with long term. As you progress, whether it's better, or let's say you need a trauma therapist, or let's say you need some type of DBT therapist, they would be able to, that therapist should be able to recognize that, and if they're looking out for your best interest, refer you further. They may not have a specific name to give you, but they say to you, this is the type of therapist that I think that would help you based on the situation that you're having.
And the directory that you mentioned, that Dr. Passley-Clarke mentioned earlier, where you can go in and ask for your preferences, it does typically have what your issues are, that you can find a therapist that specializes in that as well.
And what the other thing that site does is, it just doesn't tell you what the person says that they specialize. There's a blurb from that person. There's a write-up. And so you can kind of get a feel about where that person is in reference to their own professional journey. And you have a sense, when people write a bio about themselves or write a little blurb about themselves, you have an idea of what that person, what the feel will be from that person. That doesn't mean that it's going to be the best relationship or if that's where you're going to end, but it gives you a way to start.
And you can interview them.
Yes, you certainly can. You certainly can. If you hear something that is a red flag for you, it's going to be a red flag for you 3 weeks later.
Yeah.
Okay?
Exactly. All righty. I think we could take one more.
Okay, that's fine.
Election stress.
Oh, okay.
Do I need to say more?
I would say that a lot of times in the last, I think from 2016, I think I've read that 9 out of 10 educators right after the 2016 election were seeing an influx in racial traumas in students and stress. elections matter. No matter who you decide that you are going to put your hat in the fire with, or whatever it is important that you vote. The other thing that I will say is when you get home, you really have to think about how much of media consumption you want in your life, okay? Now, I remember when, and I was guilty of this when 2016 was going on. I mean, every night, I'm like between Fox, MSNBC, CNBC, CNN, it was like flat, just going like this. It got to be too much. Couldn't do it anymore. So I had to pull back and say, okay, how am I going to get my news? What's important to me? TikTok, okay? Instagram, too much. It doesn't mean that you can't have a consumption level in reference to the media. What it may mean is that you think about what your consumption is. Is it an hour? Is it a half an hour and you turn everything off? Everyone has a different consumption level. However, it is good to be informed, but you don't want to take it too far because then you cause yourself to be more anxious. You know, I hear people say to me that come to see me, I'm going to move to Canada. Everybody can't move to Canada, right? That's impossible. So, but and that's the source of the anxiety is what's going to happen. And I say, well, you know, no matter what happens, we adapt. That's what we do as humans. We didn't get here. America didn't just start, right? There have been years and years and years of politics and this one and that one. We're still here. As humans, we adapt, but we also have to take care of ourselves and really being aware of how much we are exposing ourselves to and kind of giving ourselves a break. Turn it off. Don't turn it back on. It's not worth it, right? Doesn't mean you don't vote. It just means that you're not consuming as much.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Dr. Passley-Clarke. Give her a hand, everybody. That's our rounding ovation.
Thanks for having me.
We appreciate you.